Imagine this, you're in the Middle Ages. You find someone you like. You can't swipe right. You can't send a text. You can't even look at them for more than a second without causing a scandal. So, how do you show someone you love them? You don't. In fact, the most popular dating guide of the 12th century told men to do the exact opposite of what you'd expect. It said that if you truly want to win a woman's heart, you should ignore her completely. 4 years. Why would anyone give that advice? And did it ever work? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll never look at a medieval romance the same way again. But before we go back in time, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Little Historical. It helps more than you know. Here's a question. If you received a bouquet of yellow carnations today, what would you think? Probably nothing. But in the Middle Ages, those flowers carried a very clear message. And it was not a romantic one. That meant I'd rather marry a goat. So how did people actually fall in love without ever saying a word? And what happened when the message got confusing? Let's find out. And while you're here, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next strange story from history.
You would think that falling in love in the Middle Ages was simple. You see someone, you feel something, you say something. But that was far too dangerous. In the year 1185, a man named Andreas Capellanus wrote a book that became the rule book for romance among nobles. It was called The Art of Courtly Love, and its advice was not warm. It was not kind, and it certainly was not honest. According to Andreas, true love could only exist under one very strange condition: suffering. If you loved someone, you were forbidden from telling them directly. You could not smile at them too long. You could not touch their hand. In fact, the book said that love and marriage had nothing to do with each other. Marriage was a transaction. Love was a private torment, and the more you suffered, the more real your love became. Here is where the intrigue begins. Andreas wrote that a man who truly loved a woman should admire her from a distance. He should write her secret poems. He should sigh when she walks past. But he must never, under any circumstances, act on his desire openly. Why? Because the church was watching, her family was watching, and one wrong glance could ruin her reputation forever. So what did lovers do? They learned to speak without words. A lifted eyebrow meant everything. A turned shoulder meant rejection, and a stolen look across a candlelit hall. That was the closest thing to a confession. The tension was unbearable, and that was exactly the point. The longing, the waiting, the sleepless nights, all of it was proof that your heart was truly captured. But there is a darker side to this game. Andreas also said that if a woman made a man suffer long enough, his desire would only grow stronger. That meant some men became obsessed. They followed their beloved through markets. They waited outside her window at night. They wrote letters that smelled of rosewater and desperation. And the women? They were expected to remain silent, to look away, to give nothing away. The power was invisible, and yet, in that silence, something dangerous stirred. Because when you forbid something for too long, the moment it finally happens, it is never calm. It is never gentle. It is a release of everything held back. So the first rule of medieval dating was this: do not date, do not speak, do not touch, just suffer beautifully and hope she notices. But of course, that silence could not last forever. And when the words finally came, they were not spoken at all. They were written in herbs, hidden in flowers, and pressed into letters that smelled of cinnamon and cloves. Which brings us to the second strangest piece of advice they gave: how to make your love letter irresistible by making it smell like a spice rack. And so the second rule of medieval courtship was not about what you said, but about what you smelled like, or more accurately, what your beloved smelled like. In an age without deodorant, without daily bathing, and without any expectation of privacy, the human body was loud. It announced itself constantly, and medieval physicians believed that scent was the gateway to the soul. If you wanted to know if someone was a worthy partner, you did not ask about their family or their fortune. You leaned in, you breathed deeply, and you made a judgment call based entirely on their natural musk. One of the most shocking pieces of advice came from a 12th century medical text written for women called the Trotula. It suggested that a gentleman could determine a lady's humor balance, and therefore her romantic compatibility, by discreetly smelling her sweat or her breath. A sour scent meant cold and dry humors. That was a hard rejection. But a sweet scent? That meant she was hot and moist, which in medieval medicine was the ideal state for love. So imagine the tension of a first encounter. A man and a woman standing close, maybe for the first time. He is not looking into her eyes. He is subtly, quietly, trying to catch her scent without being caught. And she knows it. The air between them becomes thick with unspoken possibility. Because if he approves, if her body speaks to his, then the courtship can begin. But if not, the rejection is silent. And somehow, that silence cuts deeper than any word ever could. Yet, the advice did not stop at passive smelling. Men were told to make themselves smell desirable too. They tucked sprigs of rosemary, sage, or lavender into their sleeves and boots. Every time they walked past a lady, they left behind a trail of floral mystery. Wealthier suitors carried pomanders, small, jeweled balls filled with cloves, cinnamon, and dried orange peel, that swung from their belts as they moved. The message was clear. I have taken the time to mask my human scent. I have effort. I have resources. And perhaps most intriguingly, I want you to come closer so you can breathe me in. Women, of course, did the same. They tucked scented sachets into their bodices, not just to smell pleasant, but to repel fleas. Romance, after all, is easier when you are not scratching. But the most intimate advice of all involved herbs rubbed directly onto the skin. Basil for boldness, mint for freshness, and marjoram, which one text claimed made the heart visible through the chest. The suggestion is almost unbearable. Imagine preparing for a secret meeting, pressing crushed herbs into your neck, your wrists, the soft skin behind your ears, knowing that when you finally stand close to the one you desire, they will not just see you, they will inhale you. And in that breath, everything unsaid will finally hang in the air between you. This obsession with scent led naturally to an even stranger practice, flavoring love letters with spices so that the words themselves became a kind of intimacy. But that is a story for the third piece of advice, and it involves a dead animal, a stolen glance, and a ribbon that changed everything. But scent was not the only language of medieval desire. If a man truly wanted to prove his worth, if he wanted to make his beloved tremble with something more than curiosity, he did not reach for a flower or a scented letter. He reached for something that had been breathing moments earlier. Because the third strangest piece of dating advice from the Middle Ages was this: give her a dead animal. Not a small one either. A knight who wished to capture a lady's heart would return from the hunt with a freshly slain stag, a boar's head still steaming in the cold air, or a bundle of doves with their necks broken. And he would present it to her not with apology, but with pride. You have to understand what this meant. In a world without grocery stores, without refrigeration, without any guarantee of tomorrow's meal, a man who could kill was a man who could provide. But the gesture was not just practical, it was deeply, unapologetically intimate. He was offering her his violence. He was saying, I have spilled blood for you. I have risked infection, wild beasts, and the forest's dark corners. And I thought of you with every arrow I loosed. The lady, for her part, was expected to respond with grace. She would place her hand on the animal, still warm, still damp, and offer a soft word of thanks. In that moment, her fingers brushed against death, and his eyes watched her reaction closely. Did she flinch? Did she smile? Did she dare to touch the fur, the feathers, the still red flesh? That was the test. For the most ambitious suitors, there was the ceremonial deer presentation. A knight would have a full deer roasted and presented at a banquet in the woman's honor. Musicians played, candles flickered, and 50 guests pretended not to notice that the centerpiece of this romantic gesture was a corpse on a silver platter. The tension in the room was electric, because every woman watching knew that if she accepted this gift, she was accepting him, his strength, his ruthlessness, his unspoken claim over her. And if she refused, the insult would be remembered for generations. But here is the secret that the history books do not always tell you. Some women did not want the dead animal, some found it grotesque, but they could not say so. So they learned to look away, to smile politely, to whisper to their servants, to dispose of the gift before it began to smell. And in that private revulsion, a different kind of power emerged. She knew something he did not. She knew that his grand romantic gesture had failed, and she would keep that knowledge like a blade hidden in her sleeve. Yet not all gifts were so bloody. Some were softer, smaller, and far more deceptive. A ribbon tied to a knight's armor, a flower slipped into a belt, and with those small things, a completely different game began, one played not with death, but with silence, symbols, and the most dangerous weapon of all, a secret understood by only 2 people. That is where the 4th piece of advice takes us. And so the 4th and most delicate piece of medieval dating advice was this: say nothing, but let every object speak for you. Because once the dead animals were cleared from the hall and the scented herbs had faded from the skin, lovers were left with the hardest task of all: how to confess desire without ever opening their mouths. The answer came in the form of flowers, ribbons, and poetry so carefully vague that it could mean everything or nothing at all. Imagine you are a noblewoman at a banquet. A knight approaches. He does not speak. He does not touch your hand. Instead, he lays a single flower on the table beside you and walks away. A red rose, everyone knows, means passionate love. But a violet means modesty. A lily means purity, which is a safe choice, but also a boring one. And a yellow carnation, that means rejection. He has given you a yellow carnation without a word, and now the entire room is watching to see what you will do. You can accept it, which means you accept his dismissal. Or you can push it back toward him, which means you reject his rejection, a move so bold it might as well be a proposal. The tension hangs in the air like smoke, and everyone is pretending not to notice. But flowers were only the beginning. The most dangerous game involved poetry. A man would write a verse praising his beloved's virtues, but he would never mention her beauty or her body. Instead, he compared her to the Virgin Mary, to a saint, to a candle burning before an altar. The church approved of this, the families approved of this, and yet, between the lines, something else flickered. When he wrote, "Your purity lights my darkest hour," every woman reading it knew what he really meant. He meant, "I think of you when I am alone at night." He meant, "I cannot sleep because your face appears behind my closed eyes." But he never said it, and because he never said it, no one could punish him for it. Some women wrote back. Their poetry was often shorter, sharper, and far more honest. "I have noticed your gaze," one surviving verse reads, "and I have not looked away." That was practically a confession. And in a world where a single word could destroy a reputation, that small admission was enough to set 2 hearts racing. They would meet in gardens, in chapel alcoves, in the brief darkness between one torch and the next. They would exchange tokens, a ribbon, a glove, a dried flower pressed into a palm, and they would part without a single touch, burning with the knowledge that next time, maybe, something would finally break. But here is the cruelest truth about medieval courtship. Even if the flowers were perfect, even if the poetry made her chest tighten, even if every silent signal was understood, none of it mattered without the approval of her family. And that approval was never bought with roses. It was bought with land, with livestock, and with promises signed in front of witnesses. So the most bizarre advice of all was this: fall in love however you wish, but marry whoever your father chooses. And that final contradiction between the heart's private rebellion and the family's cold contract is where most medieval romances truly ended. Not with a kiss, but with a sigh, a dowry, and a lifetime of wondering what might have been.